Okay, let's first save our current file as okay, with network. Okay, so we have uh, our processing, our locations, our entity, and we have our macro. Okay, and what we want to do is to set up a network, and path networks is the tab that we have to select. So we have a default name as net1, and what we're going to do is to define a network here among these five locations, and it is that network that a resource will use. So once we define the network, we will go to the resource, and then right now there is no network. We will specify the network here. Okay, and then the resource will have to take that path, and if there is no constraint in terms of the path a resource should or can take, then there is no need for defining a network. Okay, but here we're going to look at how to do it if that's what we need. Okay, so we need to first define nodes, and then we need to define connections among the nodes. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a node for each location, and then we will create one node right in the middle, or where the resource would normally rest. Okay, if the resource is not being used, where should that resource be placed? So if it is a human being, where that human being will sit, or if it is a tool, maybe tool room, um, or crane, it could be a position in the crane rails. Okay, so let's click nodes, and then we're gonna go ahead and click here. Okay, so that's going to create a node, and by default it's going to be N1. Okay, and we can leave it with the default names, but then if you have a really large, in a small example like this, it doesn't matter, but in a large example, the nodes, it's better to name them. So we'll prefix the name with n to indicate that this is a node. So n receive, so that's node for receive, and then click here, so that's another node. We'll call this n lathe 1, and then here call that n lathe 2, and then here n degreaser, and then n inspect, and we'll click one in the middle, say n middle. Okay, so now we have the nodes described. Okay, next there are three possible rules that we can select. The default is passing, which means if there are more than one resource allocated to the network, one resource can overtake another if that resource has a faster speed. But if it is non-passing, then even if the resource is faster than the one that's ahead of it, it cannot pass. It has to wait. So that would be non-passing, and crane is of course crane that goes on top in the railing. So we're going to select passing. So that's the default, and then we'll define the paths. Okay, so here, since this is for the resource, we need to be able to define a path for the resource to take. Um, so we will have one path from the middle to each of the location. So that way the operator can go to any one of those uh, locations. So click there and click here. Okay, so going to click. Okay, so we start with the middle node, then to receive. Okay, so we have that, and it is a bidirectional path. That to that. So n middle to node late 1, then 2, then the degreaser, and then to inspect. Okay, so the operator who is at rest in the middle can go to any one of those 5 locations. And then we want a path from receive to late 1. Then we need one from receive to late 2. Okay. And then we need from late 1 to degreaser, late 2 to degreaser. Okay. Now the distances are measured by the way the grid is set up. Okay. And that's going to be the time taken to move through the arcs will be a function of that distance. Okay. Now from degreaser to inspect. Okay. Now if you want a worker to be able to go from inspect to receive, you can add that also. Okay. So if you want to give a name for this, instead of net 1, okay, we say net operator or something like that. Alright, so now we go to resource, and now path network, okay, our net operator is here. Now we can change the home to n middle, okay, and then we will just keep the defaults. Okay. Click OK. So let's save the file. And there is one other thing we have to do before we can run the simulation. So we have to define interfaces between nodes and locations. So click on interfaces. Now we want that node to be interfaced with receive location. We want that node to be with late 1. Okay. That node with that node with that, and that node with that. Okay, so we've already assigned the network to the resource. Now we have the network completed. Now we can run the simulation. Okay, you can see the operator going along the network. Alright, so let's not worry about the results. Okay, now there is one other thing we can do, and that is these lines can be we can hide the lines, okay, the network lines. Okay. So go back to Path Network and then right click and select path color, uncheck visible. Then when you run, you will not see the network lines. Okay, again, let's stop the animation, and I'm going to say no. Now we can go into Scenario Manager, which still has the 3 scenarios that we described. So, and then we can run scenario. Then it's going to run the simulation along the network path with the 3 possible number of operators. So now let's look at the results. Okay, so let's check operators, and then we'll uncheck blank, and you have the output. It's pretty much the same. Here the network is not doing anything significantly different from without network, but this is the way in which you, if networks are important, that's how you would set it up. Now in this gear example, which is really a very simple one, so we looked at resources, how to run using setting up macros and how to run scenarios, and how to set up network. Now let's take a little more complex example next.